data is only the beginning, right? What does it say? I'm literally going to make you repeat it. Data is only the beginning. Come on.
Data is only the beginning.
Once more, twice as loud.
Data is only the beginning.
All right. Yeah. I know it's early, but there's tons of coffee back there, right? You guys all work in data. You all know how this goes. Literally, I'm going to make you do it one more time. And if you do it loud enough, I will move on. Does that sound good? Right? All right. One more.
Data is only the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you. So my name is Emily Hunt, and I am Chief Data Storyteller and Managing Director of 36NS. It's an agency that focuses on data-driven communications and strategy. Usually when I stand up on a stage like this, I talk about the results of what I've been doing. I talk about things like how we're living in an age of anger, or how technology is and isn't contributing to growing intolerance, both online and in the real world. And whenever I talk about those kinds of things, they're built on data storytelling. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, for me, data storytelling is when you look for the meaning, the actual meaning inside of several sets of data, and then you convey it in a way that, well, honestly, normal people can understand. So today I'm not going to do that. You guys know all about the data. You know more about it than I do. So instead of giving you the results from some of my studies or some of the things I've looked at, I'm going to tell you my secrets. I'm going to tell you how I do what I do. I'm going to tell you how you go from data reporting to data storytelling. But I'll come back to that. There's sort of three things that are kind of my claim to fame when it comes to interpreting numbers. And I can only tell you the political ones because I'm under NDA for everything else. So excuse the overloading on political stuff. The first one is that I called Obama's re-election margin to 2 decimal places on a train with a pen in the actual back of an envelope, which I'm pretty proud of. The second one is that I said to one of the strategists for the Remain campaign, if it rains on referendum day, we're leaving the EU. Does anybody remember the thunderstorms on referendum day? Does everybody remember how Waterloo shut down? Are we leaving the EU? yeah, we are. I did recommend he get some umbrellas. He didn't listen, but you know, whatever. The third one, my third claim to fame is I called Trump. It's not great. I took a look at the data the August before Election Day, and I knew there was something wrong with it. They were asking all of these questions on polls in the US like it was any other election, the same way they'd been asking presidential questions since like the 1950s. And that was an election unlike any other. We had 2 hated celebrities running against each other. And we were asking questions like it's LBJ. Like, no, not okay. So I knew the data was going to be wrong. And that's one of the things I'm going to come back to later. How you get the data, what it means, can really impact the stories that you can tell from it. But how I fell in love with data, well, that's a whole other thing. I got my master's in political campaign management longer ago than I would like to tell anybody. And on the very first campaign I worked on, our political consultant ran off with the money. And the worst part about that is that he was my candidate's childhood best friend. So not only did we have no money, we had a seriously depressed candidate who we were having trouble getting out of bed. But the one thing I did have was data, and tons of it. We'd done a survey, and we had it on a block-by-block level. And we also had like some direct mail type stuff. And I was able to sit inside of these data sets. And I figured out a model. I figured out where to put our resources, where to put our people to get the most bang for buck. And honestly, I was hooked. Because here I was, some 20-something, leading this fieldwork thing for a campaign, and my fieldwork plan got stolen by somebody else, which is great. And instead of saying, do this because I think it's what we should do this because this is what me and my fancy master's degree have, I got to say, do this because the data says to do it. And as like a young person on my first campaign, that was awesome. And I was totally hooked. So after that, I went to work for a couple of the big American political polling firms like Joel Benenson and Mark Penn, before moving over here and going a bit more, well, corporate. Now I work for everyone from Apple to Unilever. I have worked for a prime minister, a royal family, and the right side of an armed rebellion. None of those three examples happened in this country, particularly that armed rebellion. And what I do for clients is I look at the data and the information that they have already, and I look for the inspiration in it. I look for the questions that come up. I look for what sticks out. I look for, what does it mean? Not, what does it say? We've all been there, right? Standing in the front of a room, presenting some amazing analysis of whatever data set that you are working with. Maybe you've lost sleep over it, maybe you've lost a weekend, or maybe it's just been on your to-do list and it's taken up time. We all tend to be a bit happy when we're done with a project, when we're ready to deliver it. So you've been sent into some data set to find an answer, and you stand in front of a room like this, and you've got the answer, and you're telling them, and you're watching your stakeholders' eyes glaze over. I'm assuming we've all been there. Has anybody else been there, or is it just me? Come on. Yeah, you guys do data. You have watched everybody fall asleep. Come on. The thing for me is that I'm one of those people who does words and numbers. More often than not, I find myself being the translator. So I'm not a data scientist, but I know when to hire one. And for me, it's all about being able to translate from what the numbers say to what they mean, to then bringing it into the stakeholders' language. Because honestly, you guys speak a different language than most of your stakeholders do, right? You're sitting there, you've done all of your analysis, you've done the bell curve and the t-test, and you've denormed, and you've done everything, and you have found your answer. And when you're trying to tell your stakeholders what it means, what that massive answer is that could change the way they do their business, whether it's a data-driven strategy change, a behavior change plan, some communications, anything like that. You've got the answer, I know you do. And they just can't hear you, and they can't understand you. And that's where data storytelling comes in. Here's an example. I worked for a top 10 UK charity, which might be on this slide, but I can't tell you which one, so I had to kind of and they were doing all of this market research. Now, I come originally from a political polling background, but I have learned for my sins that most surveys don't need to be done, and the data already exists, so why would we ask people questions about it when they're just going to lie? So, let's look at the reality of it. Anyway, so working for a large UK charity, and they were spending all of this money on research. Like this giant brand tracker, and they're a really great charity. They do great work. And I walked in and I was like, why are you spending this money on this? This is silly. You don't need to know what % of people in the UK are aware of you. Everybody's aware of you. The numbers say that. And the numbers don't change. It's like, again, that problem with standing in front of a room full of people. When you want to fall asleep when you're presenting, like that wibbly line that doesn't change. Don't like it. So I said to them, there's got to be a better way of understanding how you're doing, right? There's got to be a better way. So we talked to all of their business silos, which of course, like most clients, didn't communicate with each other and held on to their data and wouldn't share, and nobody played nice. But we managed to pull all of the data out of them. And it was all unstructured, and it was very, very dirty data, and it took quite a lot of time to clean. But at the end of it, it was completely worth it, because we were able to look at things as varied as donations, people donating to their shops for sale, people buying in their shops, their ad spend, their web traffic, every Facebook like, every Twitter retweet, everything, literally every bit of data they had about themselves, we were able to look at. And we were able to whittle down their survey to 3 questions, because you know what? None of the rest of it correlated with anything that mattered. It was all just fluff and waste. We don't need that. That client doesn't need to spend that money on that. But the thing is, if we had just explained what the data said, if we had just said, okay, we've looked at all the data and we've looked at the unstructured data, we've done all these things, this is where the correlations are, this is where this is, they wouldn't have been able to listen. Instead, we had to stand up in front of them and tell them a story. Tell them what the numbers meant. Tell them how much money they could save by actually looking at, getting rid of most of their survey and really analyzing deeply the rest of the data that they had, because they weren't looking at it. And that's one of the amazing things about data storytelling. It helps our clients to really change, to really flip on the head what they can get from the data, because suddenly, when you tell it to them in the right way, they can understand it in their gut. They can feel it. And it's fantastic. It changes everything. So again, data is only the beginning. I'm not going to make you say it again. Don't worry, I see you laughing. The reason I say data is only the beginning is because when you're working with data, when you're sitting inside of it, so often we get a bit obsessed about what it says, right? And we think that if we tell the stakeholder or we tell the client what the data says, that they're going to get it, that they're going to make the right decision, that they're going to just go. But they don't get it. They don't know what to do with it. And that's where you guys can help. And this is what I said I would come back to, the secrets that I am sharing. Please don't anybody pitch against me with clients, please. Anyway, there are 3 steps to go from data reporting to data storytelling. I'll go into more depth, but I'm just going to give you the preview now. First is audience. The second is be ruthless, absolutely ruthless. And I'll explain what that means. I don't want you to actually hit your clients. Third is where the focus is. Okay? Number 1, audience. What do I mean by that? Your audience matters the most. When you're thinking about how you're gathering your data, whether it's analysis of data you already have, if you're going to go out and get new data, whatever it is, really genuinely think about the audience. I've got a question for you. How many of you were educated outside of the UK, secondary school or university? All right. Here's one of the problems. Okay, the UK is great at a lot of things, and UK education is fantastic in a lot of ways. But here, we specialize at 16. There are really lovely, wonderful, brilliant people who are your clients and stakeholders who haven't taken a math test since they were 16, right? So you're going to stand up in front of them and you're going to put numbers in front of them. Well, they've got a teenager's fear of numbers. Whether or not they know it, they're afraid. Now look, I do numbers for a living and I still have nightmares about math tests. So imagine how those people feel. And the other thing is nobody wants to feel dumb. Right? You put up a bunch of numbers. It triggers all of that discomfort. And they don't know what to do with it. And sometimes you get those clients and stakeholders who then proceed to ask really specific, nitty-gritty questions just to prove that they know what's going on. Yeah. And then you've got the ones who glaze over or get afraid and can't take your advice. And that's what I mean. You need to really think about the audience, because you probably have brilliant clients and stakeholders who just can't do numbers. They're literally afraid of them. And that's a massive disconnect, right? For you, you're comfortable with them. For you, if you're like me, maybe you use VLOOKUP tables in Excel for fun. Sorry, that's a whole other story. But yeah, I organize my life in Excel and VLOOKUP tables are my friend, and normal people don't do that. So your clients are not like that. Your clients, Excel they don't like, they've got to Google every formula, whatever, it's fine. So think about your audience, right? Most important thing. Number 2, be ruthless. Be relentless in understanding where your data comes from and every little bit of it and what it means. Okay? Here's why. More often than not, the story, the really interesting bit, the strategy, the bit of communications, the what you can do to help your client or stakeholder change what they're doing, the thing that they're paying you to look at all that data for, it's often that outlier or that thing that looks like an anomaly, right? Here's an example. A boss of mine, well, no, let's roll back. Has everybody heard of the Dove Real Beauty campaign? Yeah, Dove Real Beauty? We know that? Okay. Do you guys know where it came from? Nah, you're about to find out. So a boss of mine was working on this giant study for Dove. And they'd asked all of these questions in more than 20 countries. And he was sitting inside the data, staring at the data sheets, back when we used to print things. And he was looking at it, and there was this number all the way off to the side of the page. The kind of thing that would have never made it into like a PowerPoint presentation, because it's the number like way off to the side that nobody cares about. Anyway, that number was that 2% of women globally would call themselves beautiful. Now my boss went, no, that can't be right. But because he knew that the survey had been completely robust, he could go back and look at the question, he could go back and look at the data, he could go back and make sure that everything had been cleaned, he could go back and significance test it, he could go back and make sure the margin of error wasn't an issue, he could go back and really get to the root of it. And it was true. And only because he knew that he could trust the data that he was looking at was he able to bring that number up and start telling the story of what does this mean? What do we do with it? If only 2% of women globally would consider themselves beautiful, that's messed up. What can we do about it? And that's where the Dove Real Beauty campaign comes from. Now for all of you, you're all working with different kinds of data, different sets coming from different places, using different ways of analyzing it, answering really different kinds of questions for your stakeholders and your clients. And that's fine. But what you need to do before you really figure out how to go from reporting to storytelling is to be sure of it. To be in your guts, 100% sure of every data point. Because then, that's when you can really figure out where the story is, where the magic is, really. The third one is focus. And what I mean by this is you need to seriously focus on not what the numbers say, but what they mean. Now, we've all been guilty of delivering a presentation or a zillion-page report that spells out all of the numbers, how we get to our conclusion, right? I definitely have done that in the past. The classic one is 100 slides of graphs explaining what the data says. Here's the thing. Your clients and stakeholders don't really care what it says. What they want is for you to tell them what it means. Whenever I do a big presentation, I've got the 100 slides of data in the back that I can go over with that junior person who always wants to know every single little specific number. Fine, I can do that. I know my data inside and out because I couldn't have come up with how to convey it if I didn't know it inside and out. But the fact of the matter is most people don't actually care about the data. They want to know that it's been looked at. They want to know that you know your stuff. They want to know that you're the expert. So be the expert. You don't need to prove how awesome you are. You have your job, you have your client, they already know that you're awesome. Tell them what the numbers mean. Tell them what to do about it. Yes, offer to take them through the detail if they need it. But they're not going to need it. Because they want you. They want your brain latched onto those numbers. They want you to do that data analysis. They want you to tell them what to do about it. So I have a client that's a large database company. And they are so good with their numbers. This is not an office of people afraid of numbers. This is an office of people who love their data. I like going in there. But they were having this huge problem. They could sell their data, to the various companies that wanted it, and they were doing a pretty good job of it. But they kind of couldn't break out of their current favorite little clients. And they're doing a good job, but you know how it is. You've got to grow or you die. So what are they going to do? So they called me in, and they expected that I would help them create a data-driven thought leadership project, because honestly, that's a lot of what I do these days. And I sat down with them, and I went through everything with them. And they've got these amazing reports they do every quarter about how high-growth SMEs are doing in the UK. And they know everything. They've got so much data, they're swimming in it. And it means that nobody can focus. because they've got all of this data, so nobody's taking their expertise because there's too much of it, because they can't tell one story, and they can't even tell 5 stories. They're, putting out these books that big with beautiful graphs, beautiful data visualization. I mean, you would love this stuff. I can't tell you who they are. I wish I could, because you should go look at their collateral. But beautiful data visualization, but the story's not cutting through. So I sat down with them and I pointed out, look, your clients already know that you're the experts. They already trust you and your data, otherwise they wouldn't be paying for access to your data. So let's think about it a different way. What does success look like for your clients? They use this data to help them succeed at business. What is it that they're doing with it? Let's go talk to those people. And it's one of the few times where I was able to actually say, look, your data is perfect, it's beautiful, but nobody's going to look at it because you're telling the story of it wrong. So instead, I pointed them to some people who were the living embodiment of their data, and said, you know what, have these people tell their story. It'll actually explain your data better. It'll make people come look at the data more, come look at these beautiful big reports, because they'll want to understand where success is. And that's how data storytelling can really work. Because when you focus on the meaning instead of the numbers, it can change everything. And it can help people to really get to grips with what you have to say. This is a test. Usually I say there won't be a test, but this is a test. All right, what was the number 1? Audience. Okay, you guys are awake. This is good. I like it. All right, and what was number 2? Ruthless. Awesome. And 3?
Others.
I'm impressed. Okay. A little bit shocked that everyone's paying attention. Good to know. All right. So I talk fast when I'm nervous, and I actually do get nervous standing up here, so I think I've got some time. So let's go with one more story. Hands up if you want to know about how I knew that Hillary Clinton was not going to win, or hands down if you want to know why I knew that if it rained, we were going to leave the EU. Up or down? Up? Okay, mostly Brexits. Awesome. Okay, so how did I know? Funny story. Do you guys all know who Alistair Campbell is? Yeah. Okay. I used to work with him. Everybody's got Alistair Campbell stories. This is one of mine. So I was having lunch with Alistair Campbell, as you do, and we were talking about Brexit because he was one of the strategists on Remain. And I'd been looking at the data. I had no association with the campaign, I should say. I'm a geek. I like to look at numbers. If I can get my hands on proper data, I will look at it and figure out what it means. I just can't help it. So looking at the data, and I was just like, this does not look good to me. And I said to him, Alistair, if it rains, I'm not kidding, we're going to leave the EU. You're going to lose. And he got really cross with me. And he said, that's not a strategy. I was like, that's your job. I'm the numbers girl. I'm just saying, buy some umbrellas or, do something. And the reason I knew, right? The reason I knew was I was doing a lot of research around anger at the time. So I've got this big theory that we're living in an age of anger, that it's kind of driving everything. That's, again, a whole other talk. And if you look at my website, you can find it. But, and doing all of this research on anger at the time, I knew that there was just this real riling up, this real anger, this real feeling of a lack of control going on amongst a certain group of people. And that group of people were pretty much all leave. And it was this really emotional feeling. Now, I don't need to know, how you guys were voting, but everybody I knew, well, because I live in London, everybody I knew was voting Remain aside from 3 people. But everybody I knew on Remain, they really felt like it was important, but it wasn't an emotional thing. It wasn't like they had this burning need. It wasn't like it was going to have anything to do with their character, their sense of self, their sense of sovereignty, their sense of control. They just felt like if they could just explain really well, again, why it would be bad for the economy if we left the EU, if they just explained it louder and more slowly, that everybody would be with them. It's just not an emotional connection. And the leave people had such an emotional reason for wanting to leave. And the reason I thought the numbers were wrong was, again, it's like the Hillary and Trump problem. The political pollsters were asking questions like it was, should we move garbage pickup from Monday to Tuesday? It wasn't taking into account the emotion of it. That's one of the things that I love about collected data. And again, I come from a polling background, I come from a market research background. I think people do way too much research and we should stop because you guys have almost all of the answers in your databases. We don't need to know how somebody thinks they do something online. Let's just actually look at it, I mean, honestly. And the amazing thing about this is we can look at people's behavior online. You know, okay, let's ignore Cambridge Analytica. That's going a little bit too far over. But we've got all of these different ways at looking at what's happening and what people are doing. So I just knew that the reported data in the surveys was wrong because the question was wrong. And that goes back to that number 2. Be ruthless when it comes to your data, knowing where it comes from. In survey research, if the question is wrong, the data is wrong. And a lot of the times, I gotta tell you, the questions are wrong. That's, again, a whole other talk. But yeah, so the emotion part of it was how I knew. So, again, I am Emily Hunt of 36NS. I do data storytelling. And I've got time for questions, if anybody wants to ask.
I just want to ask a remark on this, because that anger is actually collective. It's happening around in many other countries.
Oh, you got a microphone.
I was born in Greece, so I was following the Greeks.
Yeah.
And basically they were driven from exactly the same mindset. Mm-hmm. And the same mindset occurred in United States, the same mindset occurred in United Kingdom, and the same mindset goes on in Italy now. So it actually sparks a way. So we need to be in predictive ways. You just look at other countries, that kind of mindset, the behavior that goes on.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of research in the UK and in the US on anger, and it partially started because I was just interested, and I used to work for Edelman, and do people know the Edelman Trust Barometer? It's like the biggest measure of what's going on in the world. I think they're measuring the wrong thing. I think maybe trust mattered when it started, but I think now actually distrust matters more, that like pissed offedness, that anger. So I've done work in the UK, and I have a data set and can prove that people in the UK are pissed off. It's like the technical term. And I've done a lot of social media analysis as well. And I've got 6 main reasons that people are feeling angry in the UK, and I think that it translates as well. And most of them have to do with lack of control, that feeling like things are spinning out of control. And then I did an analysis of the academic literature. Again, I'm a geek, right? This is what happens on my Sunday. And we can kind of prove through the academic literature that this state of anger can be pushed pretty easily to a state of intolerance. And then, in further academic literature, we can prove that that intolerance can be pushed to violence. One of the things that I talk about when I talk about anger is the way that hate crime went up across London after the Brexit referendum. It went up 29%. Yeah. It's bad. And that has a lot to do with people being pushed down that path. And that also has to do, Cambridge Analytica and the Russian bots were very much targeting the people who could be pushed from anger to intolerance, both in the Trump election and here for Brexit. And it is something that's happening everywhere. But I really do think it has to do with this real strong feeling of lack of control. Anyway, you had a question. Yeah.
Hi, Emily. Brilliant talk. I'm Rima.
Hi, Rima.
You picking up on the Cambridge Analytica situation and thinking from the perspective of the group that's really here to build data for good. In a post-Brexit, post-Cambridge Analytica world, what can we do to actually achieve that? Is there an opportunity around GDPR and giving control back to the users? Are they ready for that? What does the data tell you?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't looked at people's connection between GDPR and what happened with Cambridge Analytica. My expectation would be that most people haven't made that connection. People in this room would get it, but I don't think that that's something that's out there.
Do you think there's an opportunity for us as a group to do
Oh,
something about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of, making money, but doing it in a good way, being moral. I have clients I won't work for. There's sectors I won't work for. I have worked for some interesting people, but there's usually I worked for a royal family where they were talking about progressive values on like a millennia time scale, but it was moving in the right direction. But I think that we kind of need to recognize what we believe and then go for it. I mean, at the end of the day, there are
So just to finish up on this thought, how do you use data to get people to think positively about the world? And we've seen a presentation about the brilliance of smart cities, and we know what good data can unleash.
So I'm a big proponent of data-driven communications. So a lot of what I do, having come from a background working in politics and then running insights within PR agencies, is figure out how to communicate what message to whom with what channel. And when you are using data to drive those conversations, it means that you can better play out what someone's going to understand. And I think when it comes to communicating around data, we need to remember what I was talking about earlier about audience. A lot of people are really uncomfortable when we talk about numbers. They're going to get really scared, really that big, strong sense of lack of control. So I think it is probably about helping people to feel like they can have more control over their own information. And then as the company using the data, having a moral stand and doing the right thing.
Maybe not sending deluges of emails, asking them to re-opt in and figure out new privacy policies.
I might have had to do that myself. All right, you've got a question back there, no worries.
Hi, I'm Guy. Oh, it's really loud, isn't it? I'm Guy Marcus. I head up data strategy for Parkinson's UK. My question is around how do you tell the story around changing an organisation's approach to data, to becoming more data-driven in a way that doesn't scare people. So I've been told that the key barrier to what I'm doing is my job title, the data bit of data strategy.
So very entertainingly, on July 18th, I'm giving a talk aimed at workplaces that need to have a more data-driven culture for number-phobic people. So connect with me after and I'll get you connected. It's free. So it is very much, it's about getting over those barriers of people being afraid of numbers and data and communicating with them the way they need to be communicated with. You had a question.
So real quick,
Sure.
You were talking about focus.
Yeah.
As a data person myself, frequently I feel like my message is multidimensional. Like I cannot express a message in a focused kind of a way. I have to talk about the financials. I have to talk about performance. I have to talk about, whether we're hitting our numbers or not. So I wanted to kind of see, if you could, give us a little, some tips on how to do that.
So
and real quick, I also wanted to say, you didn't say how you knew that if it rained, Remain would lose.
Oh, totally missed that part. If it rains, people who don't have an emotional connection aren't going to go out in the rain. Sorry, I totally missed the point. Thank you for calling me out on that.
So the Remain people didn't go.
They didn't go.
That's the reason.
Yeah, because it rained.
I can completely understand.
Sorry, I totally goofed that one. I apologize. I've only had 3 cups of coffee this morning, and usually I'm at a minimum of 5 by now. So, thank you. Right, so I think one of the things that you really need to do is you need to think about, again, your audience and what message they are able to receive more than anything. So one of the things that I do in that situation is I literally sit down and I write it out almost like a talk or like an article, what I need them to understand. Like literally, this is my thesis, this is how I'm gonna prove it. Here's a couple of bits of evidence. And then one of the other things that I'll do is I'll really not put up lots of numbers, but I'll know them. So I'll be able to talk over it. So I'll be able to say, for example, in yours, financials, this team did this much, they're this much lower, they did this, they did, If you're able to say it, rather than showing it to them, for one, they're gonna listen to you more, rather than staring at the thing and going, you've got better control of the situation, and you're able, and again, you can have all that stuff at the back, once you've laid out your argument, what you need them to know. You can give them, the people who want to stay after, who want to know all of the detail, you can do that for them after. But it is really about laying it out in a way that they can understand. Was that helpful? Fantastic.
You've talked a lot about knowing your audience and focusing your message.
Yeah.
How do you focus your message without your audience feeling patronized or manipulated? Because if you show them only a portion of the numbers, they might feel like you're focusing your message so much that you're only telling them half of the truth.
Yeah. I think not patronizing them is hugely, hugely important because, again, they won't listen. And I'm not saying that you should dumb it down. I'm saying that what you should do is sort of shift the focus because they'll be better able to understand what you're trying to tell them if you tell them the story of it. Obviously, you shouldn't say, I know you're afraid of numbers, therefore I'm not going to put the numbers up. That's not going to work. You might think that, but it's not going to work. Instead, you need to think about what they do, how they feel, how they receive information. Because that's the whole point of communicating, right? The point of communicating isn't the person saying it, it's the person receiving it. So it's all about kind of crafting it in that way. And at the end of the day, you guys are all the experts in data. And I think that too many people feel a little bit unsure of their expertise, so they might overload in the numbers up front to kind of prove the point of, I know this. Well, your clients and your stakeholders know that you know it. Kind of go from there. Does that answer your question? Fantastic. You?
As we move into more of a machine learning and artificial intelligence of extracting meaning from data, how do you see the role of the human being or the human analysis of data changes? More and more artificial intelligence capabilities come up to do that.
Yeah. So I think that if you approach data from a storytelling rather than reporting point of view, you're less likely to be replaced by a machine. Because at the end of the day, what I do is I seek inspiration in the numbers. More often than not, I'll sort of describe myself as a creative, but my medium is numbers. Because I don't, so from the market research point of view, I don't believe that what a company should do is laid out in that data. I believe that the inspiration for what they should do is in that data. And so for us, as the people, as the layer on top of the information, it's about the critical thinking about it, the connection, understanding your client's business so that you can give advice or strategy or whatever it is you're using your data for that works for them.
Could you tell us a little bit about, in your experience, it might be a bit of a 101 question, but how you can avoid your preconceptions or biases even, affecting the questions you're asking when you're looking at the data, and therefore, any tips or advice? How should people go about avoiding that if they're trying to get the real truth?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think to a certain extent, it actually almost goes back to the morals question. You kind of have to decide for yourself that that's what you're going to do. For me, I look at giant data sets like I'm a treasure hunter. I like to figure out what's in there. I like to be informed by what's in there. I like to have the questions trigger one after the other. And then I ask myself kind of the hard questions on top of it, like what does that really mean? Is that right? Is that real? Is that the right place to go? And that does go back to the being ruthless, because you need to be really ruthless with yourself when you're analyzing data to be sure that you're in the right place and not just following the easy garden path, but instead actually coming up with that thing that matters. But it's a self-starting kind of thing. I hope that helps. All right, that was the last question, but I'm going to be here during the break. Come find me, and you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and all those things. I'm Emily in Public on Twitter, so thank you.